Indigenous people's lawful information. Lawful information is not legal advice because lawful information, you could look it up yourself. But will you? Do you have the time to look this up? And do you know how to look it up? Where would you get this information if you didn't go to school, if you didn't go to paralegal studies to take up family law or contracts to know exactly what you're getting into when it deals with children of treaty? The children of treaty are today the parents of the future of tomorrow, which the resources are protected by treaty, ceremony, sacred sites, international global protections for the indigenous people here in Oklahoma and Turtle Island abroad. So the discussion that we had focused on the Indian Child Welfare Act and tribal courts in Oklahoma. Now, you're going to have to look this up for yourself and realize that Oklahoma is not a public law 280 state. It is not. They had also stopped educating about Oklahoma history before it was even statehood. It was Indian country. Indian country, it's country within a country, its own resources, its own language, its own people, law, water, land, and Clean Air Act, too. Let's not forget that. So, when it comes to here in Oklahoma, there are 39 tribes with 28 tribal courts, some of which are courts of Indian offenses, the CFR courts like Anadarko, where you can take the crimes committed in Indian country to the CFR courts like Anadarko. That's the crimes. Now, when it comes to a competent court of jurisdiction, that's another question. Is Anadarko, the CFR court, a competent court? Is it competent to know your treaty? Is it competent to know time immemorial? Is it competent to take your sacred law and apply it in that court? I'll say no, because I've been to that court. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, CFR court in Anadarko did not protect our treaty rights, me and my son who went to Anadarko. So that's a fraudulent court because they're supposed to be bound by the supremacy clause that treaties are supreme law of the land. Again, we talked about the CFR courts. The tribal courts follow unique codes and constitution with complexities varying by tribes. So like I share with you, if you are Kispoka the Shawnee, we have a code of laws that's supposed to protect our culture, heritage, religion, children, land, air, and water by according to our treaty and our faith of our culture from the ceremonial grounds are supposed to be in our tribal court. As Professor Smith, who taught tribal courts at the University of Oklahoma College of Law. So the complexities varying from tribe to tribe, and it deals with the child protective service workers to protect the children from being kidnapped, abducted, and trafficked through these religious fashions, or known as the black robes. Black robe. You can watch the movie on YouTube and you can see colonization and the doctrines of discovery being played out if you know the 10 elements that pertain to where we're at today. And if you remember in 2023, I think that's when it was, when the Pope of the Vatican had denounced the doctrines of discovery. So they cannot be imposing Christianity on the original inhabitants to create a just war anymore, because that's where it all started. The doctrines of discovery from the papal bulls, from that place to here into these imposter tribal courts, or imposter courts if you're out there in America. But if you do go to a tribal court, just know in the code of laws, they have oaths to uphold your constitution. They have oaths to uphold your treaty. They have oaths to apply your ceremonial law in your court. So, if you're Kispoka the Shawnee, you can turn to chapter 7 of your tribal government. If you're of the clan system, you are the tribal government. that's in here that's supposed to be applied into your tribal court. Why would we have somebody else's law in our court to remove our children? That makes no sense. Why hire judges that are not of your people, that don't know your ceremonial law of time immemorial? Why would you go there? An imposter court or an imposter tribal court. If it's not your people there, or if I'm not there, then you probably is like, oh, this is definitely an imposter tribal court because Mick James isn't there. Hey, just teasing. Anyway, to get back on to the ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act, the ICWA does not apply to tribal court proceedings, offering a way to avoid its requirements. Because when it comes to Indian children, once the courts find out, they're immediately to kick it out. They do not have jurisdiction, even if they suspect the child is indigenous. They have no jurisdiction, zero, no county, no state, no municipality. None of those municipal courts have jurisdiction over you for your federal. You're up here. They're down here. Keep them down there. Know your rights. Protect your children. Know about here, at least in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act. So the tribal courts handle general and limited jurisdiction cases, depending on where you're at, including child custody and juvenile matters. So in your code of laws, they will have juvenile codes. They will have things that if you're lawless, they will apply. If you're lawless, that means if you've applied to be on this corporate roll, not the DAWs, if you're on the corporate roll, they will have policies to use upon you if you don't adhere to the policies of the corporation, because the people are the tribal government. This is a corporation that has policies that govern the lawless. Those of the ceremonial ground are not lawless. We have a law. It's written here on the tablet of our heart. That's why we walk the way we do and do the things that we do in ceremony and according to our Creator's calendar. So this was built and maintained supposedly to protect our heritage, culture, and religion, so much that we put the law, our ceremonial law, in our tribal court. So here in the courts tab, section 8 of our code of laws, the Kispokat, the Shawnees, the Big Jim, and White Turkey, we formed this to protect us, and it hasn't done so. So you have to report the crimes according to your treaty, like such as to the Attorney General or to the Commandant, or you go straight to the federal court of a competent jurisdiction that knows that the Supremacy Clause states that treaties are supreme law of the land, and every judge in every state is therefore bound by that. Okay? So, to continue on with what brief stuff I shared with the other day, hang on, I got to get my notes back up, about the Indian Child Welfare Act. Provide an overview. The recent Supreme, Dollar General versus Mississippi Choctaw. You can look that one up. Tribal courts in Oklahoma explains the emergence of tribal courts in Oklahoma, noting that the first modern courts appeared in the late 1970s, which is strange. In the 1970s, I was in that time. But we formed a corporation December 5th, 1938 to protect us. So why would there be tribal courts established in 1970 when we have a corporation 1938 to protect us? So why was there more things added in order to safeguard our culture, our children, our resources? So there are 28 tribal courts, some which are called courts of Indian offenses, and many serve multiple tribes. That's the CFR court down in Anadarko. WCD, Wichita, Caddo, and Delaware, they facilitate that. But a sovereign would not be using the BIA like we have our own court. We're under the Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act, 1936 to 1938. Tribal courts follow their own codes and constitution. That is true. The Shawnees have a spiritual jurisdiction that's applied in our court that no Caucasian would ever know. So that's how you can definitely tell that these fraudulent activist ringleaders and RICO takeover people that have infiltrated your federal funded nonprofit organization as a shareholder, they're stealing your financials, your education, any opportunity for you to succeed out in America. All these services are supposed to be help you to level up to the standards of the Caucasian living. If not, then they come and take your children. But we have, if you're part of the, what I would say, a survivor from the boarding school, such as my mom and my cousins, my sister, and myself, but even me going taken to the mission, boarding school, mission, 1 year of college, freaking 8 years, 8 freaking years of the Navy, 2 years of the Coast Guard, and come back to America to start all over. The America I left had changed while I was gone. So coming back to what? Things changed, gas went up, people changed, things have changed. And you say, where's all the red people? Oh, because the courts took them. They kidnapped them, abducted them, and put them in prison. Our own courts did that. That's fraud. They have contracts with the local jails here today. If you're part of Creek Nation, you better be careful because they contract with jails. And how do you know that? Oh, well, because the Indian Network, they let you know there are people from the ceremonial grounds that work in these corporations by Form 4432 federal tribal preference to work at their corporation. That's why you get employed to work at your company. So they work there, but they're at the ceremonial grounds to share what out there in America they're doing to the indigenous people. So be mindful and get your treaty. And remember, they do not have jurisdiction over other tribes. That's the Duro fix. You can look that up. That was until 1990. How would I know that? I was in the war. So if you go to the University of Oklahoma College of Law for their professional law degree titled Indigenous Peoples Law, it don't say Native American law. It don't say American Indian law. It don't say Caucasian law. It don't say none of that. It does say what it means. Indigenous, the original inhabitants, the people's law, the cultural, time immemorial, ceremonial law that Creator had ordained them to live by. That's time immemorial, and that's your treaty. And that's a country to country agreement that you have with the American government. However, they changed it with westward expansion. Like I was talking and sharing about earlier with the Inuit that was up in Alaska, why they are a corporation. So the complexities and variations of tribal codes are pretty much noting that the tribes like the Cherokees and the Chickasaws have detailed codes, while others like the Caddo Nation or the Kickapaws have simpler codes because the people are the government at the Kickapaw Indian House in McLeod, Oklahoma. So if you can read the charter, it tells you who's actually in control. And at the Kickapaws, at the Indian House, you can call those people from that executive committee to come to that Indian House because they have Kickapaw Indian names to be judged by the crimes they commit upon the children by these directors, the judges, the goon squads that come and abduct the children from the Indian home, foster care people too. Bring them into the Indian House to be judged by our law, because if you read your charter, it tells you what to do at the Kickapaw Indian House, the Kickapoo Tribe of Indians of Oklahoma Corporation, where I ran for, well, I tried to run for chairman. If y'all remember, they took my $500 and they mailed my application back. They didn't want Mick James to be up in there because we would have been a corporation of law. That's what we would have been. But I guess Creator has a different plan, possibly. Anyway, to continue on, the Indian Child Welfare Act defines tribal courts as those with jurisdiction over child custody proceedings, which can be the courts of Indian offenses or courts established by the tribal codes. But like I said, if you find it being an imposter court, an imposter tribal court that does not adhere to your treaty or your ceremonial law in your court, there is still a remedy for that, and that's going to the Eastern District Federal Court here in Oklahoma for your children as a competent court of jurisdiction, because that's where I'm at, in the Eastern Federal Court, because we're federal. And when it comes to Indian children, you must petition a competent court of jurisdiction that can adhere to the federal protection of the Indian Child Welfare Act, but specifically here in Oklahoma, since it's an Oklahoma federal court case, that it should be applied the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act of 1982. So you, such as me, if you're my age, who have been to the boarding school, who has been at Carter Seminary, Jones Academy, Sequoia, Oaks, Concho, it's our generation. It's our history and it's our truth, what they did to us. I will not let our history and truth go by so lightly to be swayed just because people are not educated about what happened to the indigenous people of Oklahoma that have treaty. And why aren't there corporations fending for them? You might want to check into that. Check into the vendors list or construction management. Why aren't we the construction management people? Why aren't we the judges, the dentists, the doctors? Why aren't we at this upper level while we're always down here as maintenance? When we have all these grants that are supposed to help us level up. So we'll leave that to the next discussion of why we're in this predicament that we're in. So avoiding ICWA requirements through tribal courts because they have jurisdiction over the people that are enrolled on their corporate roll, not the dolls row. There are two types of people. There's people like me that have the Buffalo logo, that have a treaty, who have IIM accounts, who have a land base. Let me see, where is that letter at? I carry my letters with me. So you will get letters from the Department of the Interior as a sovereign, as a country that has a treaty with another country right here, from their country to you, from their country to your country, Indian country, Dawes allotted land, you get letters. This is your status as a country. You have your own land, your air, your water, your resources, your law, your language, your ceremony, your corporation. You have a corporation that they acknowledge that, hey, they're stealing your money. Because if you open this up and you see the balance is always zero, why is that? Because the federal funds were shipped to the corporation into a general fund, and you're asking, hey, I turned 18, where's my money at? Like my daughter, she's 21 now. Where's her funds at? Where's her money that the tribe was supposed to invest when she was born, because she's of the Dawes, she's White Turkey and Big Jim? Where's her money at when she turned 18? You think they went for new furniture, new clothes, new lease, new phone, new laptop? Because that's what they always do when they get this position. They went from being one of us to something else. They always get a new car. What's wrong with the old car? You know? So anyway, you'll get a balance, which is fraud upon, it's called a RICO takeover of your corporation. So you'll get letters about where your money's at. So when it comes to fraud, and there's a lot of them, that if you go to the Absentee Shawnee tribe webpage and you go to the attorney roster list, because I put them on here too, the fraud aider and abaters that kidnap children, traffic children, are all a part of the scheme of MMIW, that I had to serve the courts again. They must think that these people, by Article 6 of the Treaty of Greenville, what does it say to do when a citizen, here's a whole list of citizens right here on that attorney roster that come into Indian country and do harm of the federal treaty protected families, the parents, The children. It was 8 pages. And then I got another letter that there's more people trying to motion to dismiss. And some of these actually went to OU, which is kind of strange. I still got more. There's the end of that list, but it's 8 pages. And then, like I share with you in the introduction, what I do when I serve the courts. As Professor C. Stephen Hager, University of Oklahoma College of Law, explains in his lectures upon Indian Child Welfare Act. Now it's time to talk about what happens if you don't follow the Indian Child Welfare Act of 25 USC section 1914. It says that any Indian child subject to any action for foster care placement or termination of parental rights under state law, any parent or Indian custodian from whose custody such child was removed, like mine, or the Indian child's tribe may petition any court of competent jurisdiction to invalidate an action upon showing that the action violated provisions of these sections 1911, 1912, 1913 of this title. In other words, you fail to follow the jurisdiction requirements if you fail to provide an attorney or give proper notice under 1912, if you don't produce active efforts, if you don't have appropriate expert testimony, or if you violate the voluntarily process of the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act of 1982. A court of competent jurisdiction can do away with those things. You would have to go back to square one. And that was in Indian Child Welfare Act Lecture 14, Court of Competent Jurisdiction, and Lecture 15, Placement of Indian Children by Professor C. Stephen Hager, Juris Doctorate. And I continue on even more. As Professor C. Stephen Hager, University of Oklahoma College of Law, emphasized in his Indian Child Welfare Act and Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act lectures that procedural safeguards of 25 USC 1911 through 1913 and 25 CFR subsections 23.11 to 23.118 are mandatory. Failure to comply with any of these steps voids state or tribal court's jurisdiction to remove or place or terminate an Indian child. So, if you have any questions, you may direct message me over here at IndianPeoplesLaw.com. There you can find the webpage that has the podcast, that has PDFs, that has videos for you to learn what they wouldn't teach you. You don't have the time that you think you have to go get an associate's degree, to get a bachelor's degree, to take the LSAT, to get admitted into law school. So I'm here to cut that time short and help you save your children wherever you're at. Thank you for your time, because you're not getting it back. And as Uncle Marvin would say, peace and fry bread grease. Thank you for your time. Mado, Nyaway, Aho, Uda, Palamaye, Muchos Gracias, Grazie, and all the other words that say thank you. I appreciate it. And don't forget, you can find me on these other platforms as a federal tribal prosecutor on TikTok. I'm also Mick James on TikTok if they get me out of TikTok jail. But don't forget, Mick James, Indigenous Peoples Law, YouTube, Facebook. I think it's just Mick James. I think I better change it up. And then there's Mick James Twitch on the Twitch channel. The reason why I'm on Twitch is I'm the only one Mick James on Twitch. So that's Mick